When I say Snow White, what do you picture? A princess with skin white as snow, lips red as blood, hair black as ebony. A vain queen obsessed with a magic mirror. 7 dwarfs with pickaxes and silly names. A poisoned apple. A glass coffin. A prince who wakes her with a kiss. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? That's the Snow White everyone knows. The Disney version. The Halloween costume. The story that's been told 1,000,000 times. That's not the story I'm telling tonight. Tonight's Snow White has a sister. Her name is Rose Red. There's no evil queen in this story. No magic mirror. No 7 dwarfs. Well, there's 1 dwarf, but he's nothing like the cheerful miners you're imagining. There's no poisoned apple. No glass coffin. No kiss that breaks a spell. Instead, there's a bear. A massive black bear who knocks on a cottage door one winter night, asking to warm himself by the fire. A bear who speaks, who becomes part of the family, who plays with 2 young girls all winter long, letting them ride on his back and beat his fur with sticks. There's a dwarf, a horrible, vicious dwarf, with a long white beard and burning red eyes. A dwarf who curses the girls who save his life. Not once, not twice. 3 times they rescue him from death, and 3 times he repays them with insults and abuse. And there's a death, a violent death that transforms everything, that breaks a curse, that reveals what was hidden all along. This is Snow White and Rose Red, collected by the Brothers Grimm and published in 1837. A completely different tale from the famous Snow White story. They share only a name, and that accident of naming has caused this darker, stranger story to be almost completely forgotten. The Brothers Grimm actually collected both Snow White stories. Snow White, Schneewittchen in German, was published in 1812. That's the one with the queen and the dwarfs and the apple. It became one of the most famous fairy tales in the world. Snow White and Rose Red, Schneeweißchen und Rosenrot, came later in 1837. It's about 2 sisters, a talking bear, and a curse that can only be broken by killing. It never achieved the same fame. Most people have never heard of it. But the forgotten story might be the stranger one. Tonight, I'm going to tell you what really happens in this tale. About 2 sisters who are opposites but inseparable. About a bear who isn't what he seems. About a dwarf who represents everything cruel and ungrateful in the world. About the violence hiding beneath a gentle surface. Before we begin, if you believe forgotten stories deserve to be remembered, if you want to discover the fairy tales that time left behind, subscribe to the Midnight Archives and hit that like button, because this story has thorns. Welcome to the Midnight Archives. Once upon a time, and this is how all true fairy tales begin, there lived a poor widow in a lonely cottage. The cottage stood at the very edge of the forest. Behind it, trees stretched away into darkness, mile after mile of ancient woods where wolves howled and strange things moved in the shadows. Before it lay a small garden, carefully tended, where vegetables grew in summer and snow piled deep in winter. In that garden stood 2 rose trees. One bore white roses, pure white, like fresh snow, like innocence itself. They bloomed every summer without fail, filling the air with a delicate fragrance. The other bore red roses, deep red, like blood, like passion, like the flush on a young girl's cheek. They bloomed alongside their white sisters, equally beautiful, equally fragrant. The widow had planted these trees years ago when her daughters were born, one tree for each daughter. And as the trees grew, so did the girls, until they came to resemble the roses so perfectly that the widow named them after the flowers, Snow White and Rose Red. The elder daughter was called Snow White. Though she had nothing to do with evil queens or poisoned apples or glass coffins, she was pale and quiet, like the white roses in the garden. Her skin was fair, her movements gentle, her voice soft. She preferred staying indoors, helping her mother with housework, reading books by the fire in the evening. While her sister ran wild through the meadows, Snow White would sit by the window and sew. While her sister climbed trees and chased butterflies, Snow White would help her mother cook and clean. While her sister explored every corner of the forest, Snow White would curl up with a book and lose herself in stories. She was the gentle one, the careful one, the one who thought before she acted and spoke softly when she spoke at all. In the evenings, when the family gathered by the fire, a lamb would lie at Snow White's feet. It had wandered to their cottage as a baby, lost and bleating, and Snow White had nursed it back to health. Now it followed her everywhere, slept at the foot of her bed, lay beside her while she read. That lamb loved Snow White with absolute devotion, and Snow White loved it back, gently, quietly, the way she loved everything. The younger daughter was called Rose Red, and she was everything her sister was not. She was ruddy-cheeked and wild, like the red roses in the garden. Her skin was flushed from running, her movements quick and energetic, her laugh loud and frequent. She preferred the outdoors to any room, the forest to any house, adventure to any book. While her sister sewed by the window, Rose Red roamed the meadows, gathering wildflowers. While her sister helped with housework, Rose Red climbed the tallest trees to see what she could see. While her sister read by the fire, Rose Red explored deeper and deeper into the forest, always wanting to know what lay beyond the next hill. She was the bold one, the adventurous one, the one who acted first and thought later, who laughed loudly and loved fiercely. In the evenings, when the family gathered by the fire, a white dove would perch on Rose Red's shoulder. It had flown to their cottage one day, injured and frightened, and Rose Red had nursed it back to health. Now it roosted in their rafters, but always came to sit with Rose Red when the family was together. That dove loved Rose Red with complete trust, and Rose Red loved it back, warmly, fiercely, the way she loved everything. Snow White and Rose Red were opposites in almost every way. One quiet, one loud, one gentle, one wild, one who stayed home, one who wandered far, one who read about the world, one who ran through it. But despite their differences, or perhaps because of them, they were never apart. When Rose Red went into the forest to gather berries, Snow White went with her. When Snow White sat by the fire to read, Rose Red sat beside her. They held hands when they walked. They shared the same bed when they slept. They told each other everything, kept no secrets, held nothing back. One day, walking through the meadow hand in hand, Rose Red said, "We will never leave each other." And Snow White answered, "Not as long as we live." Their mother, watching them from the cottage door, smiled and added, "What one has, she must share with the other. It was a promise, a vow, the kind of oath that children make, believing it will last forever. And for a while, it did. The two sisters lived a charmed life in that cottage at the edge of the forest. When they went into the woods to gather berries or firewood, no beast ever harmed them. Rabbits would hop up to them and eat from their hands. Deer would graze beside them without fear, close enough to touch. Birds would land on nearby branches and sing to them, as if performing for an audience. The forest itself seemed to love these girls, to protect them, to welcome them as its own. If they stayed out too late, wandering farther than they'd intended, they would simply lie down on a bed of soft moss and sleep until morning. Their mother never worried. She knew the forest watched over her daughters. She knew nothing in those woods would hurt them. Other villagers feared the forest. They told stories of wolves that hunted in packs, of witches who lived in houses made of candy and bone, of creatures that lurked in the shadows waiting for foolish travelers. But Snow White and Rose Red walked through those woods as if through a garden, and nothing ever touched them. It was magic, though no one called it that. It was simply the way things were. The girls were good, so the world was good to them. The girls were kind, so nature was kind in return. That's what they believed anyway. Every evening, as the sun set and shadows lengthened, the family gathered in the cottage. The mother would sit at her spinning wheel, turning wool into thread. Snow White would settle in her favorite chair with a book, reading aloud to pass the time. Rose Red would sit on the floor, the lamb at her feet and the dove on her shoulder, listening to her sister's voice. The fire would crackle in the hearth. Candles would flicker on the mantel. The cottage would fill with warmth and light and the sound of Snow White's gentle reading. It was perfect peace, perfect safety, a small circle of love in a world full of darkness. But every evening, before the reading began, the mother would say the same thing. "Rose Red, go bolt the door." And Rose Red would get up, walk to the heavy wooden door, and slide the iron bolt into place, locking the cottage, sealing them in. The mother never explained why, never said what she was afraid of. But every evening, without fail, she insisted the door be bolted before full dark. Something was out there. Something in the forest that protected them by day but held different things at night. The girls never asked. They simply obeyed. And then they went back to their reading, their spinning, their peaceful evening routine. They didn't know that something was coming, that their charmed life was about to change, that the door they bolted every night would soon open to something impossible. But winter was approaching. The days were growing shorter. The nights were growing colder. And something was about to knock. One evening in the depths of winter, snow fell thick and fast outside the cottage windows. The mother sat at her spinning wheel. Snow White read aloud from a book of stories. Rose Red sat on the floor, stroking the lamb's wool, listening to her sister's voice. The fire crackled, the candles flickered, and the world outside disappeared behind curtains of white. Then came a knock at the door, heavy, loud, the kind of knock that shook the wooden frame. The mother looked up from her spinning. "Quick, Rose Red, open the door. It must be a traveller seeking shelter from the storm." Rose Red set aside the lamb and went to the door. She imagined a weary wanderer, half frozen, covered in snow, desperate for warmth. Perhaps a merchant who'd lost his way. Perhaps a woodcutter caught far from home. She slid back the bolt and opened the door and screamed. A massive black bear stood in the doorway. His head was enormous, his body even larger. Thick black fur frosted with snow, dark eyes that gleamed in the firelight, a mouth full of teeth, each one as long as Rose Red's finger. He pushed his head through the doorway, and Rose Red stumbled backwards, screaming. Snow White leaped from her chair and hid behind her mother's bed. The lamb bleated in terror and scrambled under the table. The dove burst from its perch and fluttered frantically around the ceiling. The bear stood in the doorway, snow falling around him, looking at the terrified family. And then he spoke. "Don't be afraid." The words came from the bear's mouth, a human voice, deep and rumbling, but unmistakably human. "I won't hurt you. I'm half frozen. I only want to warm myself by your fire." The girls stared. A talking bear? This was impossible. Bears don't speak. Bears are animals, wild and dangerous. Bears don't knock on doors and ask for shelter. But this bear did. The mother rose from her spinning wheel. She looked at the bear in her doorway, this impossible speaking bear, and she didn't scream, didn't run, didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, she said, "You poor bear. Come in and lie down by the fire. Just be careful you don't burn your fur." She said it calmly, kindly, as if talking bears appeared at her door every winter. Then she called to her daughters, "Snow White, Rose Red, come out. The bear won't hurt you. He means well." How did she know? How could she possibly know that a wild bear meant no harm? That his words could be trusted? The story never explains. The mother simply knew, simply accepted this impossible thing as if it were perfectly ordinary. Slowly, hesitantly, the girls emerged from their hiding places. Snow White crept out from behind the bed. Rose Red edged away from the door she'd opened. They stood beside their mother, watching the bear with wide, frightened eyes. The bear shuffled into the cottage. He moved carefully, aware of his size, trying not to knock anything over. He crossed to the hearth and lay down heavily on the floor, stretching out before the fire. A sigh escaped him, a deep, rumbling groan of pleasure as the warmth soaked into his frozen fur. "That's better," he murmured, "much better." For a long moment, no one moved. The bear lay by the fire, eyes half closed. The mother stood at her spinning wheel, watching. The girls huddled together, still afraid. Then the mother spoke again. "Snow White, Rose Red, come brush the snow from his fur. The poor creature is soaked through." The girls looked at each other. Brush a bear's fur? Touch him? But their mother's voice was calm, certain. She wasn't afraid, so maybe they didn't need to be afraid either. Rose Red, the braver one, the wilder one, moved first. She took a broom from the corner and approached the bear slowly. He didn't move, didn't growl, just lay there, eyes half closed, breathing slowly. She touched the broom to his fur, began sweeping away the snow. He didn't react, didn't snap at her, just sighed contentedly. Snow White joined her sister. Together they brushed the snow from his thick black coat, working carefully around his massive body. The bear stretched and groaned with pleasure, like a dog being scratched behind the ears. By the time they finished, the girls were almost smiling. This bear wasn't scary. He was just a bear. A very large, very strange talking bear who wanted to be warm. Over the following hours, the girls lost their fear entirely. They began to play with the bear, cautiously at first, then more boldly. They put their small feet on his broad back and pushed, trying to roll him over. They climbed onto him and rode him like a horse. They took hazel switches from the kindling pile and beat his fur playfully, laughing when he pretended to growl. The bear tolerated everything, seemed to enjoy it even. He let them tumble him around, let them ride on his back, let them whack his fur with sticks. He played along, growling theatrically when they hit him, pretending to snap at their hands. Only sometimes, when their games got too rough, he would say, "Children, children, leave me my life." A strange phrase. Leave me my life. As if these small girls could somehow take it from him. As if there was something fragile beneath all that fur and muscle. But the girls just laughed and kept playing, and the bear let them. Late that night, when the fire had burned low and everyone was yawning, the bear spoke again. "I have a request," he said. "May I come back tomorrow? May I sleep by your fire through the winter?" The mother didn't hesitate. "Yes, of course. You're welcome to stay as long as you like." "Thank you," the bear said. And there was something in his voice. Gratitude, yes, but something else too. Something like relief, like he'd been hoping for exactly this answer. "Every evening," the mother continued, "at the same hour, you may come. We'll leave the door unbolted for you." The bear bowed his massive head. "You are very kind." And so began the strangest winter of their lives. Every evening, as darkness fell, the bear would appear at the cottage door. The girls would let him in, and he would cross to the hearth and lie down before the fire. They would brush the snow from his fur, bring him scraps of food, and then settle into their evening routine. Mother spinning, Snow White reading, Rose Red playing. And the bear would lie there, warm and content, listening to them. The girls grew so comfortable with him that they stopped thinking of him as wild. He was just part of the family now, a very large, very furry member of the household. They played their games with him every night, rode on his back, beat his fur with switches, rolled him around on the floor, and he let them, always let them, only occasionally murmuring, "Children, children, leave me my life." They stopped bolting the door entirely. Why bother? The bear would be arriving soon anyway. Let him come and go as he pleased. At night, the bear slept by the dying fire while the family slept in their beds. And in the morning, before anyone woke, he would rise and pad quietly out the door, disappearing into the snowy forest. Where did he go during the day? What did he do? The girls sometimes asked, but the bear never really answered. "Bear business," he would say vaguely. "Forest things." They stopped asking. It didn't matter. Every evening he came back. Every night he slept by their fire. That was enough. Weeks became months. The snow piled higher. The nights grew longer. And the bear became as familiar as the lamb or the dove, as much a part of their lives as the spinning wheel or the hearth. It was strange. It was impossible. But it felt completely normal. Then spring came. The snow began to melt. The days grew longer and warmer. The forest floor turned from white to brown to the first tender green of new growth. One morning, the bear came to the cottage door, but instead of leaving silently as usual, he spoke. "I must go now," he said. Snow White looked up from her breakfast, distressed. "Go? Go where?" "Into the forest, deep into the forest. I must guard my treasures from the wicked dwarfs." The girls exchanged confused glances. Treasures? Dwarfs? What was he talking about? In winter, the bear explained, the ground is frozen hard. The dwarfs have to stay below in their underground holes. They can't break through to the surface. But now that the sun has warmed and thawed the earth, they'll dig their way up. They'll steal everything they can find. And what falls into their hands is not easily retrieved. Snow White felt tears prickling her eyes. She'd grown attached to this strange creature, this impossible bear who'd shared their winter. When will you come back? When the ground freezes again, when winter returns. The bear turned toward the door. Thank you for your kindness. I won't forget it. He began to squeeze through the doorway and caught his fur on the door latch. The fur tore, just a small patch ripping free from his body. And Snow White, standing nearby, saw something that made her catch her breath. Beneath the black fur, just for a moment, she glimpsed something glittering, something shining, something that looked like gold. But before she could look closer, the bear pulled free and bounded away. He ran across the garden, through the melting snow, and disappeared among the trees. Snow White stared after him. Had she seen gold? Actual gold, gleaming beneath his fur? Or had she imagined it? A trick of the morning light? She didn't know, and the bear was gone. The cottage felt empty after that, quiet in a way it hadn't been all winter. The girls went back to their normal spring routine, gathering berries in the forest, helping their mother with the garden, exploring the meadows as the flowers began to bloom. But Snow White kept thinking about what she'd seen. Gold beneath fur, a talking bear with secrets, treasures in the forest, wicked dwarfs who steal. None of it made sense. But then, nothing about the bear had ever made sense. A wild animal who spoke, who played gently with children, who slept by a fire like a faithful dog. What was he? Where did he come from? Why had he spent the winter with them? The forest didn't answer. The spring grew warmer, life went on, and the sisters had no idea that they were about to encounter something far stranger than a talking bear. Something cruel, something ungrateful, something that would change everything. A few days after the bear's departure, the mother sent the girls into the forest to gather firewood. Spring was warming, but the nights were still cold. The woodpile was running low. Snow White and Rose Red took baskets and set off into the trees, following the familiar paths they'd walked all their lives. The forest was coming alive around them. Birds sang in the branches. Squirrels chattered and leaped from tree to tree. The air smelled of damp earth and new growth. They walked deeper into the woods, looking for fallen branches dry enough to burn. And then they came upon something strange. A large tree had fallen across the path. Not recently. The wood was weathered, the bark peeling. It had been down for some time, but something was moving beside it. A small figure, jumping up and down frantically, leaping into the air, falling back, leaping again. A strange, jerky motion, like a puppet on strings. The girls moved closer. It was an old man, very old, with a face like a withered apple, wrinkled and weathered and sour. But he was tiny, smaller than either of the girls, barely 3 feet tall. He had a long white beard, impressively long. It must have reached his knees when he stood straight. But right now, he wasn't standing straight. He was hunched over, pulling at something, jumping and cursing. His beard was caught. A crack had opened in the fallen tree trunk, and the end of his long beard was wedged inside it, trapped. No matter how he pulled and jumped, he couldn't get free. His eyes, when he looked up and saw the girls approaching, were strange. Not brown or blue or green, but red, fiery red, burning with anger. "Well," he shrieked, "why are you standing there? Can't you come and help me?" The girls hurried over. This little man needed help. That was clear enough. "What happened?" Rose Red asked. A reasonable question. She wanted to understand the situation before trying to solve it. The dwarf's red eyes blazed with fury. "Stupid, nosy goose. What does it look like happened?" Rose Red stepped back, startled by his venom. The dwarf jabbed a gnarled finger at the crack in the tree. "I was trying to split this trunk to get wood for my fire. We don't need great thick logs like you rough, greedy people who burn so much. I drove a wedge into the crack to widen it. But the cursed thing sprang out before I could grab it, and the crack snapped shut on my beautiful beard." He yanked at his beard again, uselessly. "Now I'm stuck here like a dog on a chain, and you two milk-faced simpletons stand there gaping. Don't you have anything helpful to say?" The girls had come to help him. They hadn't done anything wrong, but already he was insulting them, cursing them, treating them like enemies. Snow White, the gentler of the two, tried to smooth things over. "We'll help you. Don't worry. We'll get you free." "Then do it!" the dwarf snarled. "Stop talking and do something!" The girls knelt beside the fallen tree and examined the situation. The dwarf's beard was wedged deep in the crack, caught tight, impossible to pull free without damaging the tree or the beard. They tried pulling the beard gently. It wouldn't budge. They tried prying at the crack with their fingers. The wood was too strong. "This isn't working," Rose Red said. "I'll run back to the village and get help. Someone with tools." "Senseless sheep!" the dwarf exploded. "Fetch more people. 2 of you is already too many for my taste. Can't you think of anything better?" "Please be patient," Snow White said softly. "I'll find a way." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her scissors. Small sewing scissors, the kind she used for needlework at home. "Hold still," she told the dwarf, and before he could protest, she cut off the tip of his beard, the part that was trapped in the crack. The dwarf stumbled backward, free. For a moment, silence. The dwarf stood there, rubbing his chin where his beard now ended several inches shorter than before. The girls waited for thanks. They'd solved his problem. They'd freed him when he couldn't free himself. The dwarf reached down and grabbed something from among the tree roots. A bag. A heavy bag that clinked when he moved it. Gold. The bag was full of gold coins, hidden there in the roots, waiting for him. He hoisted it over his shoulder and turned to face the girls. "You wretched girl!" he screamed at Snow White. "How dare you cut off a piece of my magnificent beard? Bad luck to you! Bad luck to you both!" And with that, he stomped away into the forest, gone, without a word of thanks, without a backward glance. The girls stood there, bewildered. They'd saved him, rescued him from a trap, and he'd cursed them for it. "What a horrible little man," Rose Red said finally. Snow White just shook her head. She'd never met anyone so ungrateful, so cruel to people who helped him. They gathered their firewood and went home, trying to put the encounter out of their minds. Some weeks later, the story doesn't say exactly how long, the girls went fishing. There was a stream that ran through the forest, cold and clear, full of trout and perch. The girls would sometimes spend whole afternoons there, dangling lines in the water, enjoying the peace and quiet. They were walking along the bank, looking for a good spot, when they saw something strange. Something was jumping near the water's edge, small and frantic like a large grasshopper, leaping and falling, leaping and falling. They moved closer. It was the dwarf again. His long white beard, shorter now thanks to Snow White's scissors, was tangled in his fishing line, hopelessly tangled. wrapped around and around the thin cord. And at the other end of the line, in the water, a large fish was pulling. A very large fish, strong and determined. It had taken the dwarf's bait and was now swimming hard for deep water, dragging the line and the dwarf's beard with it. The dwarf was losing the battle. He clung to reeds and grass with both hands, trying to anchor himself. But the fish was stronger. Each powerful tug pulled him closer to the water's edge. He was going to be dragged in. The stream was deep here, the current strong. If he fell in, tangled in his own line, he would drown. "Help!" he screamed when he saw the girls. "Help me, you idiots! Can't you see I'm being pulled in?" The girls rushed to help. Rose Red grabbed the dwarf around the waist, trying to hold him back. Snow White tried to untangle his beard from the fishing line, but it was hopelessly knotted. Beard and line wound together in a snarled mess. She couldn't separate them. The fish gave another powerful tug. The dwarf slid forward, nearly pulling Rose Red off her feet. "Do something!" the dwarf shrieked. "I'm going to drown! You useless creatures! Do something!" Snow White made a decision. She pulled out her scissors again. "No!" the dwarf screamed. "Not my beard! Not again!" But there was no other choice. Snow White cut through the tangle, severing another section of his beard. The line snapped free. The fish swam away, trailing the dwarf's beard hair behind it like a trophy. The dwarf collapsed on the bank, gasping. The girls had saved his life. He'd been moments away from drowning and they'd rescued him. Surely this time he would be grateful. The dwarf got to his feet. His beard was significantly shorter now, hacked and uneven from 2 cuttings. His face was red with rage. "You toadstool!" he screamed at Snow White. "Is that how you treat a person? Disfigure their face? Cut off their beard?" "We saved your life," Rose Red began. "First you cut off the end of my beard by the tree. Now you've cut off the best part of it. I can't even show myself to my own people like this. I look like a fool." He snatched up a sack that had been lying nearby, hidden in the reeds, full of something that glittered. Pearls. The sack was full of pearls. "I wish you'd had to run until you wore the soles right off your shoes," he snarled at them. "Clumsy, horrible girls!" And he dragged the sack away, disappearing into the undergrowth. The girls stared after him. Twice now. Twice they'd saved his life. Twice he'd repaid them with curses and insults. "I don't understand," Snow White said softly. "Why is he so angry? We helped him." Rose Red's jaw was tight. "Some people are just cruel. There's no reason for it. They just are." They gathered their fishing gear and went home, their appetites for the stream ruined. More time passed. Summer was in full bloom now, the forest green and lush, the meadows full of flowers. The mother needed supplies from town, thread for sewing, needles, laces for clothing. She sent the girls to buy them. The path to town crossed a wide heath, open, rocky ground with little vegetation. The girls walked briskly, enjoying the warm day, talking about nothing in particular. Then Rose Red pointed at the sky. "Look!" A large bird was circling overhead. An eagle, massive and majestic, its wings spread wide against the blue sky. It spiraled lower and lower, as if hunting something on the ground. Suddenly it dove, dropped like a stone behind a nearby boulder, and then came a scream, a piercing, terrible scream, high-pitched and desperate. The girls ran toward the sound. Behind the boulder, they found the eagle on the ground. Its talons gripped something small, something that struggled and screamed and fought. The dwarf. The eagle had seized him and was trying to carry him off. Its powerful wings beat the air as it tried to lift its prey. The dwarf clung to rocks and grass, screaming, his stubby legs kicking uselessly. "Help me!" he shrieked when he saw the girls. "It's going to eat me! Do something, you worthless creatures!" The girls didn't hesitate. They grabbed the dwarf and held on, pulling against the eagle's grip. A tug of war began. The eagle pulled up. The girls pulled down. The dwarf screamed and struggled between them, his torn coat flapping, his shortened beard whipping in the wind from the eagle's wings. For a long moment, neither side won. The eagle was strong, far stronger than two young girls. But the girls had leverage, had their feet planted on solid ground. They pulled with all their strength. The dwarf screamed. The eagle screeched in frustration. And finally, the eagle gave up. It released its prey and flew away, circling once overhead before disappearing toward the mountains. The dwarf collapsed in a heap on the ground. The girls caught their breath. They'd just saved him from being carried off by an eagle, from being dropped from a great height or eaten or whatever fate awaited the eagle's prey. This time, surely this time, he would show some gratitude. The dwarf got to his feet. He looked down at his coat, torn and full of holes from the eagle's talons and the girl's desperate grip. His face turned purple with rage. "Couldn't you have been more careful?" he screamed. "Look what you've done to my coat! It's ruined, torn and full of holes! Clumsy, awkward creatures!" Rose Red's mouth fell open. "We just saved your life. You've destroyed my beautiful brown coat. Do you know how much this cost? Do you have any idea?" He bent down and picked up something from behind the rocks. Another sack, this one full of precious stones, rubies and sapphires and emeralds that caught the sunlight and blazed with color. "Worthless girls," the dwarf muttered, clutching his treasure. "Absolutely worthless." He found a hole in the rocky ground, a tunnel leading down into darkness, and disappeared into it, dragging his sack of gems behind him. Gone, without a word of thanks. The girls stood on the empty heath, staring at the hole where he'd vanished. 3 times now, 3 encounters, 3 rescues, 3 curses. Tree, fish, eagle, trapped, drowning, carried off. Each time more helpless, each time more dependent on the girl's help. Gold, pearls, precious stones, each treasure more valuable than the last, but never offered, never shared, just clutched and hidden and carried away. And instead of thanks, wretched girl, toadstool, clumsy, awkward creatures. "Why do we keep helping him?" Rose Red asked as they continued toward town. "He's horrible. He doesn't deserve our help." "Because he needed it," Snow White said simply. "We couldn't just let him die. He'd let us die. He'd probably laugh while it happened." Snow White didn't argue. She knew her sister was right. The dwarf was cruel, ungrateful, hateful. He would never help them if their situations were reversed. But that didn't change who they were. They helped people in need, even horrible people, even people who cursed them for it. That's what good people did, even when it wasn't rewarded, even when it wasn't appreciated, even when it cost them. The girls bought their supplies in town and headed home, hoping they'd never see the ungrateful dwarf again. They would see him one more time. On the way back from town, the girls crossed the heath again. The sun was setting now, casting long golden light across the rocks and scrubby grass. Everything glowed with that warm, honeyed light that comes just before dusk. And there, on a flat stone in the middle of the heath, sat the dwarf. He'd spread out his treasures before him, all of them, the gold coins, the pearls, the precious stones. They covered the rock like a glittering blanket, catching the evening light, blazing with color. He was running his hands through them, counting them, admiring them, a look of pure greed on his withered face. He'd thought no one would pass by at this hour. He'd wanted to enjoy his wealth in private, away from prying eyes. He was wrong. The girls stopped at the edge of the heath, staring at the display. They'd never seen so many jewels, so much gold. It was magnificent and somehow obscene. All that wealth, hoarded by this hateful little creature who cursed everyone he met. The dwarf looked up and saw them watching, his face, already grey and withered, flushed copper red with fury. "What are you doing here?" he shrieked. "Why are you standing there gaping at my treasures? Thieves! Spies! You're probably planning to rob me." "We're just walking home," Rose Red said. "We don't want your treasure." "Liars! Everyone wants my treasure. That's all anyone ever wants." The dwarf scrambled to his feet, his hands clutching at the gems as if afraid the girls would snatch them. "Get away! Leave me alone! Haven't you tormented me enough?" He was working himself into a rage, his voice rising to a scream. "3 times you've assaulted me, cut my beard, ruined my coat, and now you found my hiding place. You'll tell everyone. You'll bring others to steal from me." "We won't," Snow White began, but she never finished the sentence because something else had arrived. It came from the forest at the edge of the heath, a deep, rumbling sound, low and threatening. The dwarf froze. His face went from red to white in an instant. The girls turned toward the sound, and a massive black bear burst from the trees. Their bear. The bear who'd spent the winter in their cottage, who'd slept by their fire, who'd let them ride on his back and beat his fur with sticks. But he didn't look like that gentle creature now. His fur was bristled, his lips were pulled back from his teeth. His eyes were fixed on the dwarf with an intensity that made the girl's blood run cold. This was a predator. This was rage given form. The girls had never seen him like this. The dwarf scrambled backward, nearly falling over his scattered treasures. "Mr. Bear!" he cried. "Dear Mr. Bear, please spare me. I'm too small to bother with. I'm nothing. You wouldn't even taste me." The bear kept advancing, slow, deliberate steps, his massive paws crushing gems into the dirt. "Look at my treasures!" the dwarf shrieked, gesturing frantically at the gold and jewels. "Take them! Take all of them! What do you need me for? I'm just skin and bones I'd stick in your teeth." The bear didn't even glance at the treasure. His eyes stayed fixed on the dwarf. "Please!" The dwarf's voice broke. "I'll do anything. I'll give you anything. Just spare my life." But the bear kept coming, closer, closer. And then the dwarf's face twisted with cunning, with desperate, vicious cunning. He pointed at the girls. "Those girls!" the dwarf screamed. "Take them instead! Look at them, young and tender, nice and plump. They'd make a much better meal than me." Snow White and Rose Red froze. The dwarf was pointing at them, trying to sacrifice them, after they'd saved his life 3 times, from the tree, from the fish, from the eagle. He was trying to trade their lives for his. "Yes, yes," the dwarf continued, backing away as the bear advanced. "Eat the girls! They're the ones who've been tormenting me! They cut my beard! They ruined my coat! They deserve to be eaten!" His eyes were wild, his voice rising to a hysterical shriek. "Kill them! Kill them and let me go!" This was his true nature, stripped of all pretense. He would watch them die, watch the girls who'd saved him 3 times be torn apart. if it meant saving his own miserable life. There was nothing good in him, nothing redeemable, just greed and cruelty and cowardice. The bear didn't look at the girls, didn't even glance in their direction. His eyes stayed fixed on the dwarf, only the dwarf. He took one more step forward. The dwarf stumbled backward, tripping over his own treasures. "Please!" the dwarf screamed. "I'll give you anything, I'll—" The bear raised one massive paw and brought it down. One blow, the paw struck the dwarf's head with a sound like a mallet hitting a melon. The dwarf crumpled, fell, hit the ground and didn't move. Dead, instantly. No dramatic last words, no prolonged suffering, just death, swift and brutal. The girls stood frozen, staring. Their bear, their gentle, playful bear who'd let them ride on his back, had just killed someone, right in front of them. With one blow, they'd witnessed a murder. Terror took over. Snow White grabbed Rose Red's hand, and they ran. Away from the bear, away from the dead dwarf, away from the blood and the scattered jewels. Across the heath, toward the forest, toward home, toward anywhere but here. Their breath came in gasps. Their hearts pounded. They could hear the bear behind them, or they imagined they could. Massive paws thudding against the ground. They were going to die. The bear had killed the dwarf, and now he would kill them. He'd been pretending all winter, waiting for this moment. And now... "Snow White, Rose Red, wait!" The voice stopped them mid-stride. That voice. They knew that voice. It was the bear, calling to them in his human voice. "Don't be afraid. Wait for me. I'll come with you." They turned around. The bear was gone. Where he had stood, where that massive black shape had been just moments ago, a man now stood. A young man, tall and handsome, with dark hair and kind eyes, dressed entirely in gold, golden clothes, golden crown, golden light seeming to emanate from his very skin. The girls stared, unable to speak, unable to move. "Don't be afraid," the young man said again, walking toward them. "It's me. It's always been me." "What?" Rose Red found her voice. "What's happening? Who are you?" "I am a king's son," the man said. "A prince. And I was cursed." He stood before them now, this golden prince who had been a bear. Close enough to touch. Close enough to see that his eyes were the same eyes that had watched them from a bear's face all those winter nights. "That dwarf," the prince said, gesturing toward the body on the heath, "stole my treasures. All of them, the gold, the pearls, the gems. He stole them from me and cursed me to wander the forest as a wild bear." "But why?" Snow White asked. "Why would he do that?" "Because dwarfs covet treasure above all things, and because he could." The prince's face hardened. "The curse could only be broken by his death. As long as he lived, I was trapped in that animal form." "So you had to kill him," Rose Red said slowly, "to break the curse." "Yes, I've been hunting him for years, but he's cunning, always hiding underground in winter when I could track him, always escaping in summer when he surfaced." The prince looked at the girls with something like wonder. "And then I found your cottage, and you let me in. You gave me shelter through the winter, warmth by your fire. You were kind to me when you thought I was just an animal." "We didn't know," Snow White whispered. "I know you didn't. But it doesn't matter. Your kindness was real. And then, when spring came, you kept encountering the dwarf. You kept drawing him out, forcing him into situations where he had to surface, had to reveal himself. We were just helping him," Rose Red said. We didn't know." "I know, but every time you helped him, every time you saved his miserable life, it gave me another chance to find him, another opportunity to track him, until finally, tonight, I caught him in the open." The prince smiled, a warm, genuine smile that transformed his face. "You helped me. Without knowing it, you helped me break my curse. I owe you everything." Snow White stared at him. This prince, who had been her bear, who had slept by her fire, who had let her ride on his back and beat his fur with sticks. She thought about the gold she'd glimpsed beneath his fur when it tore on the door latch. She thought about his strange phrase, "Children, children, leave me my life." She thought about all those winter nights, reading aloud while he lay by the fire and listened. He'd been a man the whole time, a prince, trapped, waiting, hoping, and she'd never known. "All winter," she said slowly. "You were human all winter. When we played with you, I was always myself," the prince said gently, "just in a different form. Everything I felt, every moment we shared, it was real. I was there. I just couldn't tell you." Rose Red was looking at the prince with a different expression, calculating, putting pieces together. "The dwarfs' treasures," she said. "The gold and pearls and gems. They were yours?" "Originally, yes. He stole them from my father's kingdom. And now that he's dead, now they're mine again." The prince smiled. "And I intend to share them with the people who helped me most." The sun had set by now. The heath was dark except for the faint gleam of scattered jewels and the golden glow that seemed to surround the prince himself. He stepped closer to Snow White, took her hand in his. "Come with me," he said, "to my father's kingdom, to the palace where I grew up. Be my wife." Snow White looked at him. This man she'd known as a bear, this prince she'd fed and sheltered and played with all winter long. She'd grown to love the bear, that gentle creature who'd shared their fire, who'd listened while she read, who'd tolerated their games with such patience. And now the bear was a man, a prince, a king's son asking for her hand. She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said. But the prince wasn't finished. He turned to Rose Red. "I have a brother," he said. "He's been searching for me all these years, refusing to believe I was dead. He never gave up hope." Rose Red raised an eyebrow. "A brother? You've never mentioned a brother." "We've never talked much," the prince admitted. "Bears aren't great conversationalists. Despite everything, the death, the transformation, the strangeness of this night." Rose Red laughed. "My brother is kind and good," the prince continued. "He would be honored to meet you, and I think you might like each other." "You want me to marry your brother?" Rose Red asked directly. "A man I've never met?" "I want you to meet him. What happens after that is up to you." The prince smiled. "But I suspect you'll get along. He's bold, adventurous, always restless, not unlike someone I know." Rose Red looked at her sister. Snow White nodded slightly. "All right," Rose Red said. "I'll meet him, but I'm not promising anything." "That's all I ask." They left the heath that night, left the dwarf's body where it lay, left the scattered treasures to be collected later. The prince led them through the forest, down paths they'd never walked before, deeper into the woods than they'd ever ventured. By dawn, they reached a road. By noon, carriages had arrived. sent by the prince's brother, who'd somehow known to expect them. By nightfall, they were at the palace. It was magnificent. Towers and spires reaching toward the sky. Gardens and fountains and courtyards. More rooms than the girls could count. More servants than they'd ever seen in their lives. The king, the prince's father, wept when he saw his son. He'd believed the prince dead for years, had mourned him, had nearly given up hope, and now, here he was, returned from the dead, restored to human form, bringing two young women who'd sheltered him through his exile. The celebrations began immediately. Rose Red met the prince's brother the next morning. He was younger than the prince, taller perhaps, with the same dark hair and kind eyes, but a different energy, more restless, more impulsive, more alive. He'd been in the stables when they arrived, grooming his favorite horse, unable to sit still and wait. When he finally came to the palace, he was windswept and laughing, full of energy and questions. "So you're the ones who sheltered my brother all winter," he said, grabbing Rose Red's hands. "You're the ones who kept him alive. I could kiss you." "Please don't," Rose Red said dryly. "We've only just met." The prince's brother laughed. "I like you. You've got spirit. I've got more than that. I've got opinions. Lots of them. Even better. Opinions are interesting." They talked for hours that day, and the next day, and the day after that. The prince had been right. They got along. Within a month, there were 2 weddings planned. Snow White would marry the prince. The gentle girl and the man who'd been a bear. Rose Red would marry his brother, the wild girl and the restless prince. The ceremonies were magnificent. The whole kingdom celebrated, music and feasting and dancing that went on for days. The king declared a week of holiday. Taxes were forgiven. Prisoners were pardoned. Everyone rejoiced. 2 princesses now. 2 sisters who'd gone from a cottage at the edge of the forest to a palace at the heart of a kingdom. The dwarf's hoard was recovered. All of it. Every coin, every pearl, every gem. It filled 3 wagons when they brought it back. The prince divided it between the sisters. Half for Snow White, half for Rose Red. A fortune for each of them. More wealth than they could spend in a lifetime. "This was stolen from my kingdom," the prince said. "But you helped me get it back. It's only right that you share in it." The sisters tried to refuse. They hadn't helped him for treasure, hadn't even known about the treasure. But the prince insisted, and eventually they accepted. They were wealthy now, royalty, set for life. The old widow came to live at the palace. Of course she did. Her daughters wouldn't leave her behind in that cottage, alone at the edge of the forest. She was given comfortable rooms, servants to attend her, everything she could want. But she brought one thing with her from the old life, the rose trees. She had them dug up from the garden, carefully, roots and all, and transported to the palace. They were planted beneath her window in the royal gardens. Every year after that, they bloomed. White roses and red roses, side by side, just like always. A reminder of where they'd come from, of the cottage and the forest and the life before, of 2 girls who'd promised never to leave each other. And they all lived happily ever after, Snow White with her prince, Rose Red with hers, the mother comfortable and cared for, the roses blooming every year. The end. That's what the story says anyway. But there are questions the story doesn't answer, things it glosses over, details it rushes past. The story moves so quickly at the end. Bear becomes prince. Prince proposes, sisters marry, everyone's happy, as if the Brothers Grimm wanted to wrap things up before we could think too hard, before we could wonder about what really happened, about what was lost along with what was gained. Snow White and Rose Red was published by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm in 1837 as part of their famous collection of German fairy tales. But this story is different from most of the others in their collection. The Brothers Grimm were primarily collectors, not creators. They gathered folk tales from oral tradition, stories that had been passed down for generations, told by peasants and grandmothers and village storytellers. But Snow White and Rose Red has very few sources in oral tradition. Scholars have found almost no earlier versions of this story, which means the Grimms may have largely written this tale themselves, or at least heavily embellished a very simple source. Wilhelm Grimm, in particular, liked to polish and reshape the stories he collected. He softened violence, added morals, gave tales a more literary quality. Snow White and Rose Red feels more like a written story than an oral tale, more deliberately constructed, more polished. It's not folklore in the traditional sense. It's a fairy tale that was designed to feel like folklore, and that makes its choices even more interesting. Let's think about how the family reacts to the bear. A massive, wild animal appears at their door, pushes his head through the doorway, and speaks in a human voice. This should be terrifying, impossible, the kind of thing that sends people fleeing into the night. But the mother just says, "Come in, poor bear. Lie by the fire. No fear, no surprise, no questions." She accepts the impossible as if it were perfectly ordinary. That's a technique the Grimms use often, presenting magic as mundane, making the supernatural feel domestic, making the strange feel familiar. But it has another effect too. It makes us accept things we shouldn't accept. It lulls us into the story's logic, where talking bears are normal, and curses are real, and violence solves problems. By the time we reach the end, we've stopped questioning. We've accepted the story's world, and maybe we've missed what's really happening. The dwarf, we're told, stole the prince's treasures and cursed him. That's all the explanation we get. He stole. He cursed. He's evil. But think about the gaps in that story. How did a dwarf steal from a prince? Princes have guards, armies, locked vaults. How does a small creature with no apparent magic simply take royal treasure? And the curse? How did the dwarf have that power? Cursing a prince to become a bear, to be trapped in animal form until the dwarf's death. That's serious magic. Where did a greedy, ungrateful little creature get that kind of power? The story doesn't explain, doesn't want us to ask. The dwarf is simply evil. That's all we need to know. He hoards treasure, curses those who help him, lives alone underground. He represents greed, ingratitude, isolation, everything the story hates. His death isn't murder, it's justice. It's pest control. But isn't that convenient? A villain so awful that we cheer when he's killed. Here's the darkest element of this gentle fairy tale. The prince's curse can only be broken by the dwarf's death, not by kindness, not by true love, not by any quest or trial or act of heroism, only by killing. The bear spends months with the family. He's gentle, patient, kind. He lets the girls play with him, ride on him, beat his fur with sticks. But the whole time, he's waiting for a chance to kill the dwarf. The sisters' kindness doesn't break the curse. Their love doesn't transform him. Their mercy and patience and generosity None of it matters. What matters is death. What matters is violence. That's the solution the story offers. When faced with evil, kill it. Don't try to redeem it. Don't try to understand it. Just destroy it. Maybe that's realistic. Maybe some evil can't be reasoned with or reformed, but it's a dark message for a fairy tale. And the story presents it so casually. Bear strikes, dwarf dies, prince appears, that we barely notice what we're being told. What did Snow White and Rose Red actually accomplish in this story? They sheltered the bear through the winter. That was kind, that was generous, but it didn't break the curse. The bear would have survived the winter somewhere else. Their cottage was convenient, but not necessary. They saved the dwarf's life 3 times. Tree, fish, eagle. But each rescue just kept the dwarf alive a little longer, kept him in the story, gave the bear more chances to find him. Were the sisters unwitting accomplices? Did their kindness to the dwarf actually serve the prince's plan? The story doesn't say the bear arranged their encounters with the dwarf, but it doesn't say he didn't either. The dwarf kept appearing in their path, kept getting into trouble, kept needing rescue. Coincidence or design? And if design, if the prince was somehow engineering these meetings, then what does that say about his time in their cottage? About his gratitude? About his love? Was any of it genuine? Or was it all strategy? Think about what happened during those winter months. The sisters played with the bear. They rode on his back. They rolled him around. They beat his fur with sticks. They treated him like a pet, a toy, an animal. And he was a prince the whole time, a grown man, a king's son, trapped in animal form, unable to reveal himself. He let them treat him like that. Let them ride him, let them hit him, let them play. "Children, children, leave me my life," he would say. We thought it was playful, a joke, part of the game. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was the only protest he could make without revealing himself. Maybe it was genuine, a man begging not to be treated like an animal even though he looked like one. When he transforms, when he becomes a prince again, does he think about those games? Does he resent them, forgive them, cherish them? Does Snow White, when she lies in bed next to her new husband, ever think about riding on his back? About hitting him with sticks? The story doesn't say, but the questions remain. Here's something subtle that you might not have noticed. At the beginning of the story, Snow White and Rose Red are vivid characters. They have distinct personalities. They speak, act, make choices. They're the protagonists. But after the transformation, after the bear becomes a prince, they virtually disappear. The prince speaks. The prince explains. The prince proposes. The sisters just accept. They say yes. They marry. They live happily. They don't ask questions. Don't express feelings. Don't have reactions that the story bothers to record. They were active throughout the tale. Now they're passive. Objects given in marriage rather than people with their own arcs. Their voices disappear from the narrative at exactly the moment when they should have the most to say. That's not an accident. That's how fairy tales work. The story is over when the marriage happens. What comes after doesn't matter, but it does matter. It matters to the girls who have to live the rest of their lives in this new reality. Except we'll never know what that reality is like, because the story ends. "We will never leave each other." Snow White said it. "Not as long as we live." Rose Red answered. They were children when they made that promise, holding hands in the meadow. unable to imagine a future where they'd be apart. But marriage in the 19th century meant leaving. It meant joining your husband's household, your husband's family, becoming part of his world, not yours. Snow White marries the prince. Rose Red marries his brother. Even if they live in the same palace, and the story doesn't confirm that they do, they're not the same anymore. They belong to different men now. Their first loyalty is to their husbands, not each other. The promise couldn't survive growing up, couldn't survive the happy ending. Fairy tales always end at happily ever after. They never show us what comes next. But for Snow White and Rose Red, what comes next is separation. Different households, different lives, different fates. They'll see each other at court functions probably, exchange polite conversation, watch each other's children grow up. But they won't hold hands when they walk, won't share the same bed, won't tell each other everything. That's not a tragedy. That's just life. That's just what growing up means. But the story promised us something different, promised us sisters who would never part. And then it broke that promise. The mother brings her rose trees to the palace. It's a small detail, easy to overlook, but it's the last image the story gives us. 2 rose bushes blooming beneath a palace window, white and red, side by side. The roses do what the sisters couldn't. They stay together, stay unchanged, stay in perfect harmony year after year. They keep the promise the girls had to break. That's not a happy detail. That's a melancholy one. The flowers remember what the humans had to forget. The garden preserves what life couldn't. Every year, those roses bloom, white and red. 2 sisters who promise never to leave each other. And every year, the actual sisters live their separate lives. Growing older, growing apart. The roses are a memorial, a monument to something that was lost. The story calls it a happy ending. But the roses know better. So what is this story about? What were the Brothers Grimm trying to tell us? On the surface, be kind, be generous, help others, even when they don't deserve it. Your kindness will be rewarded. That's the obvious message. The one children are supposed to learn, but underneath. Kindness doesn't actually solve anything. The girl's kindness to the dwarf doesn't redeem him. The bear's curse isn't broken by love or mercy. Violence is what works. The things you love will be taken from you. The sisters' bond is broken by marriage. Their identities are subsumed into their husbands. The promise they made as children cannot survive adulthood. Good girls get princes. That's their reward. Not adventure, not achievement, not self-actualization. Princes, husbands, a new family to belong to. These messages are uncomfortable. They contradict what we want fairy tales to tell us, but they're honest in their way. They reflect the reality of 19th century Germany, where women's fates were determined by marriage, where violence was how problems got solved, where childhood promises couldn't survive the adult world. The Grimms knew this. They lived it. They just wrapped it in a story about a bear and a dwarf and 2 girls named for flowers, and told us it was a happy ending. At the end of the story, 2 rose trees bloom in a palace garden, white and red side by side, just like in the cottage where everything began. The widow tends them until she dies. Then servants tend them. Then they become just part of the landscaping, decorative bushes beneath a window that no one remembers planting. But they keep blooming. Every year, white and red. Snow White and Rose. Red started this story in perfect harmony. Two sisters who promised never to leave each other, who held hands when they walked, who slept in the same bed, who needed no one but each other and their mother. They lived in a cottage at the edge of the forest where animals loved them and nature protected them. They wanted nothing, needed nothing, feared nothing. Then the outside world came knocking. First as a bear seeking warmth, then as a dwarf needing rescue, then as death, transformation, and marriage. They gained so much: wealth, status, husbands, crowns. But they lost their world, their cottage at the edge of the forest, their freedom to wander the meadows, their identity as a pair. Maybe they're happy in the palace. The story says they are. Maybe they see each other every day, laugh about the old times, raise their children together. Or maybe they drift apart, the way siblings often do, become queen and duchess, too busy with royal duties to remember when they were just two girls in a cottage, playing with a bear by the fire. The dwarf is dead. The prince is free. The treasures are divided. Everyone got what they deserved. But somewhere in that story, two girls made a promise they couldn't keep. We will never leave each other. Not as long as we live. They meant it when they said it. With all their hearts, they meant it. But life doesn't care what we mean. Life has other plans. The bear knew who he was the whole time. Every moment by that fire, every game, every gentle growl, he knew he was a prince waiting for his chance. The dwarf knew who he was too. Greedy, ungrateful, cruel to the end. He never pretended to be anything else. Only the sisters didn't know. They thought they were helping a bear who needed warmth, thought they were rescuing a dwarf who needed saving, didn't know they were pieces in someone else's game. Maybe that's the darkest thing in this gentle story. Not the death, not the curse, not the transformation, but the realization that kindness can be used, that innocence can be a tool, that the people you trust might have plans you'll never understand. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever made a promise you couldn't keep, or helped someone who didn't deserve it, or watched something innocent become something else, subscribe to the Midnight Archives. In the comments, tell me, would you have kept helping the dwarf? After the first curse, when he grabbed his gold and screamed bad luck to you, would you have helped him again? After the second curse, when he called you a toadstool and wished you'd wear through your shoes, would you have helped him a third time? There's no right answer, but I want to know what you'd choose. The cottage is empty now. The mother lives in a palace. The sisters wear crowns. The bear is a man. The dwarf is dead. But in the garden, two rose trees bloom, white and red, side by side, keeping the promise the sisters couldn't.